If you want to create memorable and engaging character designs and portraits, you're going to need to learn to draw faces. But I don't want you to learn 3 basic, frankly boring head angles and have you think you got it on lock. That won't help you down the line. Instead, in today's video, I'll show you drawing methods on how and what I study to draw better portraits at any angle, making them more dynamic. By the way, my name's Artenkai, and in the last 3 or so years, my mission's been to make the best stories I can with my art. But I've realized I'll need to learn how to draw characters for that, so this video is a way of solidifying my own knowledge, as well as helping you out. The first thing I'm going to show you is how I draw the face, but I'll do this from a front profile, just so you get a practical idea of the methods and guidelines I use. Typically I use the Loomis method as a sort of foundation, but it can change depending on the angle of the head. Luckily in this example, the Loomis method can help me represent the head and face pretty accurately, so I don't have to make several edits later on. And by the way, for those who don't know what the Loomis method is, it's a method of drawing the head that simplifies its shape and features, making it easier to reproduce the form of the head consistently. It also shows a few of the relationships between features, making them easier to memorize. Also, if you're drawing along, which I would recommend, make sure to use a reference, ideally one from real life, as you can test how accurately you can draw using the method. I draw the face by starting with the head shape, which in a front profile is circular. With this down, I can then place this sort of U or V shape under the circle, which connects to it at the halfway point. This is the jaw. If the subject you're drawing is male, the jaw can be drawn more angular, with the chin being a little wider. However, if your subject is female, the jaw is typically more rounded and the chin smaller. Although it's important to vary proportions to create a likeness, if they look too different every time, unintentionally, you're only training a bad habit, inconsistency. So I like to keep this rule in mind when drawing the face. Just note though, this can change a lot due to people's different preferences. In art, it's vital that you understand how to manipulate space, as you'll begin to know where to add detail and where to leave something blank. Now, how does this apply to the face? A feature of the body that is filled with nothing but detail. If you consider the head as one whole, then the features can be split into thirds, stacked on top of one another. 3 somewhat equally sized spaces, but where do they lie on the face? Well, the first third starts from the hairline down to the eye line, so the next third can stretch an equal length from the eye line to the bottom of the nose, and the same goes from the space between the bottom of the nose to the tip of the jaw. This concept makes it a bit easier to plot the features, even if you're not always sure where they go specifically, which I'll get into in a moment. Another thing I make sure to do is cut off the sides of the face, where the ears will be. But the reason why I do this is because if you take a look at the front view of a skull, you'll see that the sides are actually flatter than you think, and definitely more than what a circle allows. After creating the overall head shape, I add the lateral line of symmetry, which will help with keeping proportions accurate later on. The next steps are to draw the brow and eye lines, with the brow line laying on the center of the face, horizontally, and the eyes sitting a little lower. As a consequence of mapping out the overall shape of the face and placing down the central landmark being the eyes, it's now a lot easier to draw the rest of the facial features in the right place. For example, the bottom of the nose is found in the middle of the space between the eyebrow line and the chin. The mouth does something similar. The line created where the 2 lips meet is slightly above the halfway point between the bottom of the nose and the chin. Because I had the brow line and the nose down, I can now put the ears in place. Do you see how the features of the face all connect together in the end? It's almost as if they're proportional to each other. What a coincidence. Anyway, the tips of the ears line up with the outer corners of the eyes, and the earlobes line up with the bottom of the nose. Remember at the start of the video where I explained how the face can be split into thirds? Well, there's often nuance when drawing these thirds, especially between the male and female face and younger versus more mature people. For female and child portraits, the space between the hairline and the eye line is proportionally bigger than that of adult males. In fact, most facial proportions of females, or at least the most important ones, are in comparison bigger than those of males. Like the eyes, other key things that are different between the male and female face are that the male face, despite having a relatively shorter forehead, is typically longer, especially from the eyebrows to the chin. This is called facial height. Speaking of the eyebrows, the eyebrow ridge is also more pronounced in the male anatomy, as well as the thickness of the eyebrows themselves. The chin is also more prominent and overall larger in males. Another thing to stay aware of when drawing the face is keeping the proportions the same at different angles and perspectives, because this could make or break a portrait no matter how ambitious and creative the composition. To avoid making the skull appear too long in a 3/4 view, I remember that the far corner of the eye is halfway between the edge of the face and the edge of the back of the head. A few times I've made the mistake of essentially pushing the head too far back by placing the ear in the wrong place. Another reason to start a portrait by drawing the head first before the features, when you're starting out at least. A simple but kinda difficult to execute remedy I use for drawing tricky head angles is perspective exercises. I would draw boxes at many different angles, remembering to keep the lines in perspective, meaning that once the box is drawn, they all should eventually converge at 3 different points. Assuming it's 3-point perspective and each of the dimensions of the boxes should be equal. Honestly, that's enough to get a feel of how perspective and foreshortening works on 3D objects, but of course we can go a step further. Within those boxes, I draw spheres that should hypothetically touch the flat edges of the box. Like I said before, the side of the head is more flat than it is curved. From there, I'd add my guidelines and I could finish the face off, but the purpose of this exercise is just to understand how proportions can look at certain angles. For example, from a top-down angle, the jaw sort of shortens and flattens, the ears appear higher up the face, the mouth and the chin begin to be less visible as the head tilts down. All of these instances follow the rule of foreshortening, which is basically how things appear smaller the further they get from the viewer. This is why the chin, as an example, gets smaller. The other features are closer to the viewer and the chin is comparatively further. To make extra gains, I would strongly recommend using real-life references for this exercise, or illustrations done by artists you admire if you want to replicate their style. Using references can give you feedback on what your art is missing, both literally and technically in terms of your skill. It's of course very important to know how to draw something, the method, but it's equally as significant to know what you're drawing, and so this is where anatomy studies come in. For learning to draw the head, it's pretty much as simple as learning the bone structure of the head, the skull. So I typically draw skulls from reference when I realize that my faces are looking a bit off. To see what I've learned, and more importantly, what I haven't, I draw what I studied and observed from imagination, and in this case, I can apply it to drawing the faces themselves. I have a video on how I use references in more depth, and I'll link it down below. Once you've done that, it's rinse and repeat from there, and that's it. This was a quite dense video with a lot of detail, and there are so many topics I'd like to cover and take a deeper dive into, like perspective, stylization, and more. I'd really appreciate if you commented what topics you'd like to see next. Now, with this new knowledge, it's time for you to take action. So pick up a pen or pencil, keep drawing, and always keep improving.